12 o'clock today. But first of all, I want to talk about obesity, and I want to talk about trauma. Now, you'd wonder, why am I talking about the two together? Because there's quite an amount of research out there now that suggests that people who live with obesity, suffer from obesity, live with obesity, people who struggle with their weight, that a lot of it is to do with trauma in their lives. And a couple of reasons why we wanted to touch upon it. First of all, a lot of people will be dieting as we head into the new year, trying to get rid of the COVID stone and the Christmas stone that has arrived on top of it. And they'll be wondering why they yo-yo up and down, why they can't lose weight and leave it there, lose it forever. They wonder why they snack badly or eat badly or that kind of thing. And they're thinking, what is it about me that I can't trim down? What is it about me that I'm not motivated to look my best or to feel my best or to eat and exercise properly? There's a lot of research going on about that. And some people, it's down to trauma in their lives. Louise George is a researcher who works for a program called Eating Freely. And she joins me now. You've also worked, Louise, I think, in eating disorder services in the UK for many years for people recovering from anorexia and bulimia. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me on. I'll just clear up one thing. I'm not a researcher. I'm a counsellor. Okay. And so I worked in the UK for about 10 years in eating disorders services in the health service there. And since I've moved to Ireland, I've actually been running a yoga studio. I'm actually a yoga teacher, but I'm also still a counsellor, and I work for, as you said, the Eating Freely team, which offers a program for people with emotional eating. How
much of disorders like anorexia, bulimia that you've worked with, how much of that, when you get to the root cause, how much of it comes from early life trauma?
I think there's a huge amount. And I think the thing about trauma is really a distressing or a disturbing experience. So it might be something like physical or sexual abuse. It could be witnessing abuse going on in the family. But it can also be things that are very invisible, like neglect and feeling abandoned or feeling rejected. So it's kind of difficult to put your finger on exactly what a trauma is, but basically it's an experience that is distressing and that overwhelms the person's kind of what we call psychological resources. They don't have the resources to deal with that stress. And if you think about a child, they don't have the ability to make sense of what's going on around them. And so, oftentimes that trauma that they experience, which might not even have words because it might be happening when they're so young, is held in the body. And so, we try to soothe those feelings in the body when they're triggered, and food is a way of doing that, really.
Yeah. So effectively, trauma is kind of anything that happens at any stage in life, doesn't necessarily have to be childhood, that you don't have the resources, the psychological resources to deal with. Yeah.
And I mean, even you just, thinking about COVID there, we're all living through a very traumatic time right now. And those COVID pounds that maybe we've all gained are maybe a reaction to that trauma. We're trying to look after our nervous system. We're trying to soothe ourselves. We're trying to get through. And then this idea of putting yourself on a strict diet in January to lose that feels to me very harsh and is likely to fail. I mean, if pounds are gained just because maybe we haven't been exercising as much or our lifestyles have changed, then perhaps, a diet might work. But generally, they tend to not. I think there's something they say in terms of resolutions even, about 9 to 10% of resolutions actually work. So we're setting ourselves up for failure right from the get-go,
You mentioned COVID, and it's an interesting path to go down. It is traumatic on all of us. We've all been through a very traumatic 11, nearly 12 months now. And one of the things with regard to eating is you're sitting there on a Saturday night and you just know that you don't really want another pizza. But heck? What else is there to do?
Yeah.
Is
Well,
that a normal psychological response?
Yeah, I'd say that's a natural response. I mean, there's many things that make us eat. We sometimes, obviously we eat because we're hungry, but we sometimes eat when we're anxious. We sometimes eat when we're angry. We're swallowing down feelings. We might be avoiding something. We might be feeling lonely. We might be bored. We might be tired. It might just be a treat. Like you say, there's lots of different reasons that make us eat. And I think that's the difficulty when we're addressing, emotional eating and sort of overeating, is that if it was drugs and alcohol, we can just say no, we can remove those things, but we have to eat. So it's very difficult to strike that balance, and to kind of understand what it is in that moment that is making us want to eat.
Yeah. Comfort eating is a term. What is comfort eating? Is that what comfort eating is?
It is really, yeah. If you think about, sadness and anxiety and poor self-esteem, we're often taught to medicate them as a child as well. You fall over, you cut your knee, your mum says, rubs your knee and then gives you a biscuit. And, we're kind of soothed by food from a very young age. And if you think even babies when they're suckling, it's comfort. It's a way of comforting ourselves. So food can become really the balm that soothes the pain, comfort eating is a huge factor.
Yeah. Caller on the phone here is an interesting one. Her daughter had an operation. It doesn't say whether that was recently or when, but her daughter had an operation, and from the day she went into hospital, she stopped eating normally.
Right.
That seems to be a trauma, isn't it?
Yeah, there's lots of traumas around sort of medical procedures as well. And it seems to be that sometimes even when people are unaware of what procedure has been done on the body kind of keeps the score. A lot of this is very much linked into the nervous system. When we've been through trauma, you see, when trauma is happening, whether it's a trauma that's a sort of immediate thing that's happening in a moment, or whether it's chronic over a period of time, trauma tends to disrupt the way we store memory, and it disrupts, basically, I won't go into neuroscience, but the frontal lobes of the brain kind of switch off when we're experiencing trauma, when we're in that heightened fight and flight state. So we struggle to always make sense of the reasons why we feel the way we feel. It can be very difficult to sort of unpick it all. So I don't know in that situation whether it was fear that her daughter was feeling, that, maybe not eating was a way of trying to control some of those feelings, or whether it was a procedure that she had done to her that created a sense of trauma. I don't know. But yeah, that's very common.
Is it true that you can actually pick up evidence of trauma on something like a brain scan?
Yeah, neuroscience, there's a lot of work being done in that field. And as I say, I'm not a researcher and I'm not a neuroscientist, but there's a huge amount of work. There's a really interesting book, if there's anybody listening that wants to kind of delve into this, called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's by Bessel van der Kolk. And he goes into a lot of that work, looking at brain scans and looking into trauma and how we store trauma in the body. So there are different ways of approaching it. Obviously, I'm a counsellor, and so we would be looking at, experiences and emotions and thinking patterns. And I'm also a yoga teacher, and I will get people coming to yoga classes who maybe have trauma and don't want to necessarily talk about it, but get a lot of soothing from yoga and can release the trauma that is stored in their body through a physical practice, a somatic practice, body-based. So we call this top-down, so that's the sort of talking therapies, and bottom-up, which is, going to like yoga classes or doing some kind of physical way of releasing trauma. So there's a lot of research being done on both, and I think ideally those two need to come together, and that's what's happening. A lot of counsellors are sort of exploring body-based therapies, and lots of sort of yoga teachers are doing counselling training. So gradually, I think, we'll start to see these two things come together. And I think that's what's needed,
Other people picking up the phone this morning to the opinion line and asking questions of you, because clearly they're fascinated by the connection. I feel, says this person, I feel I neglect myself and then I become disgusted with myself and I comfort eat. is trauma down to neglect? Is the neglect a kind of trauma?
Well,
and she adds that she had a very poor childhood. Her family were very poor when she was a child.
Yeah, and so she possibly felt neglected as a child and maybe didn't learn how to really treat herself and her body with compassion and how to comfort herself. And so that tendency to neglect her needs has continued into adulthood. And, so we repeat these patterns. We do repeat what we learn as a child. If you've had parents that have been very comforting and very nurturing and given lots of hugs, and maybe you find it easier to look after your own needs, whereas if you've grown up in a family where you were feeling isolated or lonely or neglected or abandoned, you tend to, and this is just a tendency to abandon yourself. And so this is the thing with dieting, you see, and why I think this New Year's resolution idea of, right, I'm going to go on this strict diet and I'm going to lose all this weight. If you think about it, and I mean, this is quite fascinating to me, really, that we're actually putting our body into a state of fight and flight because we're beginning to maybe exercise more on fewer calories. We're depriving ourselves. We're ignoring our hunger cues. We're actually depriving ourselves. And so you might
inflicting more trauma, if you want.
Yeah, really, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, diet in itself could traumatize us if you look at it that way.
Mentioning January, and the fact that it is the month when people decide, right, I'm going to be beach ready, I'm getting rid of the extra pounds, I'm going to be fit, I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to be all these things. There is a huge culture and business built around that.
Massive.
And it's not such a good thing, is it?
No, it's huge business, both multi-billion pound industry. Do you know what I mean? And this is the thing. So we go on the diets and we might sort of lose some weight and feel like it's working. And then what we've lost then are the very things that were soothing us. So food now has become like the enemy and not the comfort that it used to be. But we still need that sense of comfort and soothing. So eventually we kind of give in and we go back to what we know and we start to regain the weight. And sometimes we gain more weight on top of that. But now we feel like a failure and we see ourselves as weak. But actually it's not, the whole, like you said, the whole industry is built to make us fail. Like they don't want us to feel good about ourselves. They want us to keep buying these foods. And actually I was only just thinking that, like if they don't catch us in January, then like you say, it's the beach ready body coming in sort of May time. And then if they don't get you then, it's like the little black dress for Christmas, or so
I hear a suggestion there in what you're saying that they don't actually want us to succeed. In other words, if we succeed in the 4 weeks heavy duty discipline or 5 weeks discipline in January and February, if we succeed, we're lost to them as a customer. Exactly.
Yeah, they make money out of us that way. They want us to feel bad about ourselves. I mean, it's even when you think about, sort of the beauty industry, it's huge. They don't want women to feel happy as they are. They want to keep us, buying their products. So, yeah, I think, and really, I mean, food is made to be hard to resist, very high fat, very high sugar. It gives us a dopamine hit. When you eat certain foods, we all know that if you open a bag of Doritos, you're not going to put it away, you're going to eat the whole bag. No. They make these things to be irresistible. And you see, I think we're getting all these warnings all the time from, government health services that we need to get obesity in check and we need to lose weight and be healthy. And it's makes us feel like it's an individual issue, whereas actually at the same time, we're surrounded by this industry that is constantly... I was actually only thinking there the other day, like I live in Douglas Village, and there's a huge area there that they were building on. And for a short time, I thought maybe they'll build sort of like, I don't know, a roller skating ring or a bowling alley or something that we can do that's active and we can go there with our kids. But they've built another supermarket, and across the road from it, there's another fast food drive-through. And these kind of fast foods, they're so cheap to people. They make them so cheap that, we're going to make wrong choices or not necessarily wrong choices, but those choices because they're easy for us. And
we're led down the road of making those choices. Where can we find out more, Louise? Is there a website you recommend?
Well, obviously, Eating Freely, I've got to sort of say there's a great program there for people with emotional eating. I think you can read around this. There's lots of information on the internet. There's lots of research. There is, for people with eating disorders, there's Bodywise, which is the National Eating Disorder service. And I have to say that eating disorders, these are not necessarily eating disorders. I think that across the board, people struggle with food and eating and, their relationship with food. So it's not necessarily an eating disorder, But what I would say as well is rather than dieting in January, what I'd encourage people to do, if they're struggling with their body image or their weight, is to maybe start journaling around their eating behaviour and asking those questions. Am I hungry? Am I anxious or angry or lonely or bored or tired or tense? And start to work out, their connection to food, because there's a lot of insight can be gained just from doing that.
It's a good starting point. Lastly, a question has come in here, Louise. When I have dark thoughts about what happened in my last job, I withdraw and I do nothing. I get very hungry and I eat rubbish. I'm getting huge. What's happening? Can you help?
Yeah, well, that is a very normal sort of a reaction. If you look at the nervous system, we tend to either go into fight and flight, which is, this very highly stressed sort of state of anxiety, or we can go actually into a state of immobilization. And that's a normal response to traumatic events as well, where we tend to sort of shut down. And in that sort of space of feeling shut down, we will tend to potentially overeat and kind of withdraw inwards and isolate ourselves. And it's a nervous system response.
If people want to contact you, Louise, where can they go about it?
Well, funnily enough, I actually just set up an Instagram page yesterday, and I've called it Counselling Connected, because I also have a page called Yoga Connected. And I think, as I say, it's all connected. Body and mind is very much connected. So Counselling Connected is where you can find me on Instagram at the moment. Otherwise, I don't have a website for my counselling work just yet, but you can find me through Douglas Yoga Centre. As I said, I have a yoga studio in Douglas Village, and I do a lot of sort of one-to-one yoga sessions there, but I also do counselling sessions there. Or you can find me through the Eating Freely website.
Okay. Louise, good to talk to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
That's Louise